All right, everybody. Thanks for your patience. I think we'll just go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We are the Food Shed Alliance. We're a nonprofit based in northwestern New Jersey, focused on supporting farmers, feeding people, and protecting the environment. This series is presented through our Farmer Resources and Land Access Program, the SAGE program. Stands for Sustainable Agriculture Enterprises. We work to make land and other resources more available to farmers, focusing on supporting organic and regenerative initiatives. So this webinar tonight is sponsored by a grant from the TOPP program, so the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. This program is a new USDA initiative that will invest up to $100 million over 5 years to provide education, technical assistance, and support to help producers transition to organic. So the goal of this initiative is to help grow the organic sector. They provide farmer-to-farmer mentoring, technical assistance and training, community building, networking events, workforce development and training, and a lot more. And so I will drop the link to more information about their program and initiative in our chat box. And we're very grateful to the TOPP program for funding us. So yeah, again, my name is Tess. I'm working with the Food Shed Alliance, and I will be monitoring the chat. We're really grateful to have Dave Zelov of Kittatinny Farm here, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a second. But just some housekeeping. You all should be allowed to unmute yourself. So we would really love for this session to be interactive. If you have any questions that come up while Dave's going through his presentation, please feel free to just unmute and jump in. But if you'd rather type into the chat, I'll be monitoring that and make sure everybody's questions are heard in a timely manner. So yeah, without further ado, just take it away, Dave. And if anyone has any additional questions or anything on the side, feel free to.
All right. Thanks, Tess. Hello, everybody. I apologize, my camera isn't working, but my screen sharing should be, so that's the important stuff. You guys don't necessarily need to see me. Yeah, again, want to encourage everybody to, as we go along, stop me if you want clarification on something that we're talking about. And we'll also, save time at the end for like other questions of things maybe I didn't cover or related topics. But as much as possible would like it to be interactive. So just a brief introduction, I guess. I have, with my wife Danielle, been running Kittatinny Mountain Farm. This is our, let's see, we started in 2011. I think this is our 14th year in production. We started out on rented land we're in Wantage, up in Sussex County, pretty close to High Point State Park. Started out on rented land. We were there for 13 years, growing on about 2 acres, a little bit more, maybe, for CSA, farmers markets, and the occasional restaurant sale. We, 2 years ago, had the opportunity to purchase some land close by when we bought 24 acres, but not all of that is like tillable ground. It's well, not mostly, about half in woods, and there's pond and streams and that kind of stuff. There's 2 hay fields, and then we have about 4 acres that we could, maybe a little more than 4 acres that we could are good for vegetable growing. Currently, though, we are only growing on about half of that. So our crop rotation is such that we are keeping half of that in cover crop, like a full year cover crop, each year. And so, half the land is in rest each year. We sell at the Sparta Farmers Market. the Milford, Pennsylvania farmers market. We have a it varies between 30 and 40 members CSA, and we've started doing a little bit of wholesale as well. So I think that kind of sums it up. I'm gonna get started sharing a screen then, and we can jump in. I had done a similar talk over the last 2 winters at Sussex County Community College. And so some of this, there was a lot of stuff to cover. Crop planning, there's, from figuring out how many seeds to buy to doing your crop rotation to figuring in cover crops to evaluating your land and what's good to grow and where you're going to sell. And there's a million things to cover, and probably at least half of them could be their own talk. So I tried to condense some of what I was doing there into an hour and a half or so. So hopefully it all makes sense. And I'm basically, I don't know where everybody is exactly coming from in your experience, but I thought I would approach this as far as, you're looking to start a vegetable farm or flowers. We do a lot of flowers as well. And, you're looking to evaluate land and figuring out what to grow on it and how to plan for that. So, people might be coming from different perspectives. Some of you may already have land. Some might be looking for land. I think everybody wants to learn a little bit more about figuring out, how to plan for what to grow on there. But I'm gonna start out with a little bit about, looking at the land, site assessment. We'll talk about market research. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of business planning, but just as far as thinking about your markets and um, how that determines what you want to grow, um, pros and cons of different outlets, and then figuring out, what crops to grow for each outlet, and then kind of go through how we approach this. There's a million different ways to do it. And our way isn't necessarily the best. I don't claim to be the most organized when it comes to this stuff, but we try to do a good job with record keeping. We're certified organic, have been for the last 10 or so years. So you got to do a lot of record keeping for that. So, we've gotten into that quite a bit. But you can see a list of things that like to talk about, determining seasons, how to figure out, um, how many row feet of carrots to grow for, the outlets, and how to figure out some of the yield information. Um, and taking that information and figuring out how many plants you need, how many seeds do you need, and trying to fit it into a crop map and rotation. But I think what, the final product, I guess, and how I think of this is coming up with a schedule and a map that you can use um, to follow through your season. Like when it's June or July, you don't want to be thinking a lot about how many, how big the next planting of radishes should be. I like to have a schedule that shows me, each week what I need to plant, what I need to seed, and I like to just follow that when we get into when we're in the season there. So I thought just briefly talk about, looking at a site, um, kind of the things you might look for if you don't have land. Um, when you're wanting to plan a farm. I mean, there's kind of two places to start from here, um, or two ways to approach this, and I think there's probably equal amount of people who do each one. One is you have a business plan and you know what you want to do, You want to start a 2-acre vegetable farm, you want to sell, through a CSA, and then you find the land to fit what your plan is. The other option is that you make a plan to fit your land. You might have land that is um, really hilly or really wet, and maybe vegetables aren't a great fit for it. Um, but so you need to figure something else out. But or just as could be even as far as the amount of acreage. You might want to start a 10-acre farm, but you already have land and you only have 2 acres, so you're going to plan for 2 acres. So some of this stuff is interchangeable as far as the order that you might approach it. So some of the things that like to like to look at when you're um, deciding where you might want to farm and evaluating a piece of land. Um, the location is pretty important. Luckily, in New Jersey, in our area, we have a great location as far as access to customers. Land is expensive, but you know, we have access to how many millions of people, and it's all within a pretty easy driving distance. But that, of course, influences the cost of land. So, if you're thinking about farming in an urban area versus a rural area, that's kind of the trade-off. Most farm, for vegetable crops, flowers, and stuff, looking at the topography, you want generally a level land, less than a 5% slope, just to minimize erosion. You know, that being said, we are now farming land that has less than that, but we grew for quite a while at on our rented land with, I would say it was up to 8% slope, maybe even a little bit more. And it was, in addition to really needing to take a lot of precautions for erosion, it got really tiring to walk up and down the hill. It's also can be kind of dangerous if you're looking at operating tractors and things like that to be on a hillside. So luckily we're on a little bit of a flatter land now. We are, south facing is kind of ideal for most vegetable and flower crops. We are not on a south facing land. Um, if the shot that I have up here is an overhead of our farm right when we bought it, and you can see the two vegetable growing fields. They had been in corn prior to us purchasing the land. We put it in cover crop for a couple of years, but uh, they are kind of sloped to the west, northwest a little bit, and it's fine. They don't warm up as quickly in the spring. Something else to look at is air movement. You don't want to be down in a frost pocket. Um, Cold air settles and is heavier than warm air. So, if you're at the bottom of a valley, you're going to have an earlier frost in the fall often than if you were kind of up on the side of a hill. But at the same time, you do want some airflow. Uh, we happen to be in kind of a windy area, which can be inconvenient. Um, we built our greenhouses in a slightly less windy area up towards the top, and that is beneficial for those structures. But the wind, it can dry out your crops a lot more, create damage to greenhouses, tunnels. You know, have visions of row cover and plastic getting taken up by the wind and uh, you know deposited in trees. Sun exposure, think about when you're laying out your fields and stuff, looking at the distance from the buildings and trees and stuff like that, particularly with greenhouses. Obviously, full sun is the most ideal situation. Water, both like, from a perspective of how you're going to supply it, and then I suppose is more in soil, but the water holding capacity of soil. But most crops are going to need about an inch of water a week. And thinking about scale of your farm, you might be limited in the amount of water you can supply. Um, we have never had enough water to irrigate our whole farm. Um, so we've tried to rely on things like mulching and we use drip irrigation, and we hope for rain. Uh, in a complete drought, luckily with the drought we had over the last couple of months, it was in September, October, November, when we didn't have as much growing and things aren't drying out quite as fast. But I would say if that happened in June and July, we'd be kind of screwed. So we're looking at, we have one well, but it, puts out maybe between 5 and 10 gallons a minute. It's not enough to do the whole farm. So we're thinking about drilling another well at some point in the next year or two. But you need to think about water. You need access to water for washing produce, for water for flowers, and for irrigation. Looking at the soil, you've thinking about the textural class of the soil: sand, silt, clay, ideally having a loam soil. Uh, the if people haven't looked at it, the best source I've seen is the NRCS Web Soil Survey. There's books on it, from the library, but online is a great tool. You can map your farm, check out the soil. That if you're just considering a piece of land, you can see what that looks like ahead of time, and give you great information about the topography, the depth of bedrock, the water holding capacity, nutrient holding capacity, all of that stuff. I think you can make most soils productive, and especially on a smaller scale. And but if you're starting with prime farmland, that can certainly make your life a lot easier. Access, for deliveries, customers, um, is going to make your life easier. When we moved to our new farm, there was sort of a driveway there, but we had come from a place where there was already a lot of infrastructure there. We had built greenhouses, but there was already a driveway. There was a parking lot. There was electricity. There was water already there, and so we had to uh, put a lot of those things in and put a lot of drainage in our driveway. But you want to be able to accept deliveries of potting soil, and depending on what kind of farm you're running, a CSA in particular, you're gonna want to have, well, in many instances, want to have customers come out to your farm to pick up produce. And finally, just looking at the land, the history of the land, what has what's been going on there, what's the past use, what's the neighboring activity, proximity to roads. We did some soil testing, as far as like the regular stuff, nutrients, but also tested for some like lead and metals and stuff like that, just to kind of know a little bit more about what we were dealing with. Um, Anybody have any questions as far as site analysis and looking at a piece of land? All right, we'll move on then. So scale, in thinking about what in your crop planning, if you don't, have a farm yet, of thinking about what kind of scale that you want to be on, I think is important. Um, Tractor, I have kind of three of the main or tractor based BCS, um, walk behind, and then hand hand scale. We do a little bit of everything. I would say we try to do, moving more and more to tractor base. We started out mostly hand scale, using some borrow tractor occasionally, and a BCS, but now I've moved more towards tractor based. farming. But as far as, things that might determine your scale, how much land is available, how much does it cost to buy it, how much water is available, um, and then thinking about how much money you need to make. Are you doing this full time? Are you starting, off on a part time and keeping your full time job? I think one of the biggest questions is, do you want to manage people? Do you like working with other people, or would you rather be, out in the field by yourself? Um, and that can determine your scale. You can certainly get a lot of machinery, but with vegetable farming, when there's certain activities, such mostly harvesting and planting and weeding, I suppose. So that can be mechanized, but harvesting certainly, you need help out there. So you're probably not going to be doing 10 acres of vegetables by yourself. Um, what kind of equipment do you like to work with? Do you like tractors? Uh, do you want to maintain tractors or rototillers? Do you like working on that stuff? Um, how much money do you have to invest? And the other big question, I think, is how do you want to sell your produce? You know, is it retail or wholesale? Uh, do you like working with um, or having a relationship with your customers, um, or would you rather sell wholesale and once it leaves the farm, you're done. Um, but regardless, I always encourage starting small and getting big as needed. We started off on about 3/4 of an acre our first year, and grew from there. But I think some of the advantages of staying small for us, a less expensive startup costs. We didn't have any money when we got started. We borrowed a little money from the farm service agency. Um, we didn't have help at first. It was just the two of us. Um, and it's easier to find an acre of land than it is to find 10 acres of land, especially up in our area where there's not a whole lot of flat ground. But there's going to be a certain ways that you're going to do things on a really small scale. In an acre or two, you're probably not going to be doing wholesale. You're going to concentrate on retail sales, high value crops, um, quality over quantity. There's a lot of thinking about the efficiency of space and how you lay out your beds, how you, um, the spacing of how many rows per bed, how many, inches between plants within the rows, that kind of thing. And then, over time, as far as like, you know, double cropping or triple cropping, succession plantings, really fitting everything in on a map. Um, and that's where the planning and record keeping comes in. Like, you are trying to get the most out of a piece of land that you can. So, focusing on the high value crops, probably not going to do a lot of sweet corn or maybe winter squash. Those, just don't make the same amount of money as those, quick turnaround crops like scallions or radishes or lettuce, those kinds of things. So a lot of it comes down to crop selection, but the planning and the scheduling, so that when you have a planting of radishes coming out, you know what's going in there and that it's another high value crop, and that you have transplants ready in the greenhouse to go out or into those beds. Yeah, don't want to. I'm not a business. Uh, I'm not an expert on business planning, I'll say, but it is important to have a business plan, especially if you want to go for funding. We did, as I said, go for a farm service agency loan to purchase a BCS tiller our first year. We also went for another loan through them to buy our land 2 years ago, and having a good plan and showing them what you want to do and that you've done your research and uh, you know can pay that loan back is pretty important. But it also can give you a good guideline um, for your business, for how you are going to run your farm, keeping your goals in order and your objectives. I think thinking about marketing is one of the first things you want to do. It's part of your business plan, but know where you're going to be selling before thinking about what to grow. Because listed some of the outlets there that thinking about might think about, and if those outlets crops are going to be different for each one. For things like for CSA, you're going to kind of grow a little bit of everything. For farmers markets, you're also going to grow a little everything. But wholesale and restaurants, you're thinking about what exactly they would want. I think that each one has its pros and cons, but your crop selection is gonna very much depend on that. He said the CSA, like you need a diversity of crops throughout the season to fill boxes. Or if people, you kind of have a market style CSA, people need to be able to come there obviously and have a good selection throughout your growing season. Farmers market, kind of the same thing. You're needing to fill the market stand throughout the season. Um, the CSA can be hard to do on a smaller scale. I think there's some crops that don't make sense on a small scale, like broccoli or winter squash. Just some of those that take up a lot of space and aren't necessarily the highest yielders, but people might expect in a like full CSA. So sometimes that can, not that you can't tailor your CSA to the type of land. I mean, you could have a salad CSA. You could have just with um, um, a summertime CSA with tomatoes and peppers and eggplant. There's certainly different types, but there is a little bit of a pressure to kind of grow everything. On a farmer's market, it's not quite as much, but you still need to be able to fill that stand. And a lot of it comes down to personal personal preferences, what you like to grow, and some of it evolves and your customers' preferences. We started out growing a lot more varieties of things than we grow now. We used to do like 8 different types of zucchini, and now everybody just kind of wanted green zucchini. So we still keep some yellow ones in there, but it's we're doing maybe 2 varieties now instead of 8. Um, but
Hey,
uh,
Dave, I'm sorry. I see we have somebody's hand raised and I just
Great.
wanted to
Yeah,
take.
I can't see. Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh,
Tia, if you want
uh,
to unmute yourself and ask your question if your hand is raised on purpose.
okay, no question, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it's not working. So I guess if it's either an accident or if you had a question and you're just not unable to unmute yourself, feel free to type it in the chat and I'll read it out. Thanks.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. Any questions in the chat so far?
Nope, just some folks sharing about their growing space. So we've got Brittany coming from Montclair, 2 growing seasons farming on a small scale at an organic farm in Minnesota, I think is MN. And then managing a community garden in Montclair now. Looking to plan to expand the model into half the space being used more as an urban farm. Thanks, Brittany. And then Christina, hi Christina, founder of Pura Farms and beginner farmer approaching year 3 incubating at the Rutgers Beginner Farm Program, growing vegetables, edible flowers, and herbs on 3/4 of an acre. And then we have Jacob and Sam from Mevo Farms in Mawa, so working on a small market garden on 2 acres. So that's what we have shared in the chat so far. So thanks everybody for chiming in. And just a reminder, if you do want to ask a question or jump in, feel free to do so. Thanks.
Thank you, Tess. So yeah, evaluating the list of things, like I said, we do a CSA, farmers market. We've done some restaurants. We've started doing a farm stand, and we've started doing a little bit of wholesale. I really like the CSA model. We started doing that as well as, at the same time as we started doing the farmers market. It's certainly nice to have some money during the winter if you have people pay up front. That allows us not to have to get a loan each year. Um, it comes with a little bit of pressure in that people have given you money and then you have to deliver. But I like the customer interactions with a CSA. I like that the money has already been taken care of, and you can, especially with people coming to the farm, you can chat with people. We do a lot of pick your own crops. And so people, come out, bring their kids, pick herbs and flowers, and you have some time to talk with them. At the farmer's market, things can be a little more hurried, which is a good thing. If, you have a lot of customers there, but you don't necessarily get a chance to really talk with people. And it's, you have the exchange of money happening there. And so it's, you're just focused on getting people's orders tallied up and moving on to the next person in the line. And it's not quite the same, but then there's not quite as much pressure to deliver. I mean, you have to have a full stand, but if you don't have, you know, every single crop, or if you sell out a little early, or if, one or two things isn't on your table that week, not a big deal. It's a little more forgiving in that sense. Um, I think restaurants and wholesale, the challenges are in, meeting that demand each week. And restaurants are going to want you to commit to a certain amount of produce, each week. If they want, carrots, they kind of want them for at least a month. And it's hard to find somebody to work with, a chef to work with, where they're willing to just take what you have each week and in those amounts. I mean, if you find somebody that flexible, it's great. We used to have somebody like that. Who would come pick up on the farm. But oftentimes with restaurants too, you got to have a pretty good delivery schedule. They're going to want things during the week and, delivered to them. So a lot of times it's been just not having the time to go deliver things, but it's a little more challenging in that sense. But a lot of it also depends on what the opportunities are in your area. And if there's already 5 other CSA farms, then you might not start a CSA farm right there, but maybe there's an opening at the farmers market. Maybe there's more of opportunities at the restaurants. And um, so some other things we're thinking about are the profitability of certain crops. I think I mentioned, things like broccoli and winter squash. We're always looking at the, you know, whatever unit you want to use, if it's a square foot, or I think of things a lot of times in terms of our beds. Um, but how much money is a crop um, gonna yield you for per bed or per square foot? And particularly on the smaller scales, you're going to be looking at um, the most profitable ones. The CSA, you might have to grow some things that are slightly less profitable, but that's okay. The So efficiency of space. Like I said, comparing the dollar per row foot of different crops. I look at, say, use the example of lettuce. You have a 100-foot bed of lettuce, and our beds are about 4 feet wide, 4, no, 5 feet if you include the pathways. So we'll grow four um, 4 rows of lettuce. 100-foot bed, you have 400 heads of lettuce, and you could sell them for $4 a piece. We said at our market, so $1,600 for in 100-foot bed, I think is pretty good. If you're looking at something like sweet corn, um, you know, it's planted every foot. You might have 200 plants of sweet corn. Um, you know, Even if everyone produces an ear and you could sell them for $2 each, which maybe you can, um, you know, what you got $400 or so there. So it's we don't grow sweet corn. Um, we Broccoli is another similar one like that. Um, you know, Looking up at the list there. Um, some of the ones that really stand out for me for the best, highest yield per unit, um, our some of our top crops are carrots, greens, like kale, Swiss chard, not so much, cucumbers, garlic, lettuce, onions can be great, especially fresh onions, herbs certainly. Parsley and basil are are great for small spaces. Peppers can be decent. Um, Radishes, tomatoes, um, zucchini. Those those are some of our top yielding um, crops. Um, Flowers are another one. We've been starting to do more flowers, and the you can grow a lot of flowers in a very small space, and we've been trying to do more and more of that. Um, yeah, things like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cabbage. You're a few $100s per bed, but you can do a few of those. You might need to do some of that to fill out your market stand, or to make sure that your CSA is well um, provided for, but not going to be your bread and butter. This was a slide from uh, Elliot Coleman's New Organic Grower, and he kind of divided things into major and minor crops, and looking at it more from a like crop rotation and mapping, like that you're going to have, say, more of those major crops. They're going to take up more space than some of the minor crops. Um, I don't know if anybody's worked at all with crop enterprise budgets. It's something that it's always been a goal to look at. There's some good tools out there. Rutgers actually has some fact sheets on it that I saw recently. There is a book by Richard Wiswall that has a whole lot of examples of how to do these, but essentially you are putting in all of the expenses of each crop and figuring out what it's actually costing you to grow it. So I know, for instance, what our top five sellers are, but I we've started to do this a little bit, so I don't have any hard data on it yet, but I'll use the example of a bagged salad mix, which we did for a long time, um, and we gave up a couple of years ago, for a variety of reasons. But one of the biggest ones was that the labor expense, it looked really good on paper from, when we looked at our sales. We had maybe $10,000 a year in salad mix, but if we factor in the labor that we were putting into, cutting and bagging and washing it and all of that, it didn't look quite as good. So just the crop enterprise budgets really take everything into account, from the compost that you might put down to row cover, tomato stakes for tomatoes. You enter in all of the expenses for each crop, and then you need to do a lot of timing, as far as like um, time yourself. How long does it take to weed it? How long did it take to plant that? So there's you can estimate to get it figured out, but in order to get um, a really good handle on it, you kind of need to do some of that. So we're working on it. Um, so kind of talk a little bit about crops. You know, obviously there's a million varieties of each crop to think about. Some of the things that we, like to focus on are the, since particularly being certified organic, and I don't like to spray even with um, organic sprays. So we're looking for a lot of disease resistance in our when we're looking for seeds, looking for heat and cold tolerant varieties, um, especially things like you know lettuce and greens, wanting to be able to do them all throughout the summer. The It kind of depends on what your marketing strategy is. We started out doing a lot of heirloom stuff, and that maybe differentiated us at the market. I think we've been going back to growing some more hybrid crops mostly because of disease resistance, particularly with tomatoes. I love heirloom tomatoes, but we looked at our plantings of heirlooms and hybrids compared to each other, and the hybrids are still going in October, and the heirlooms that we're just done. It's so susceptible to disease. Um, we're again certified organic, so we're looking for certified organic seeds, and we have to buy a certain number of certified organic seeds. But I think that it's also good to just buy seeds that are mm, grown, have been producing in the conditions that are most similar to what you're going to be growing in an organic system. Oftentimes there's um, might be less plant available nutrients, might be more disease pressure. And so buying organic varieties of seed, certified organic varieties, are often going to perform better in your organic system. But obviously there's a color and flavor and all of that good stuff, particularly with farmers market and CSA um, kind of crops.
Hey,
Um,
sorry to interrupt real quick, Dave, and thank
no,
you,
don't be
Dave and
sorry.
Tess, for putting this together. I'm curious what you meant by certified organic seed performing better in like a certified organic system. I guess I've always been like a little confused about what the upside to, I guess, buying organic seed is versus inorganic when you're going to be growing it, or at least in our instance, in an organic matter anyway.
Mhm.
So yeah, if you could just clarify what you meant by that.
Sure. Um, I mean, one, I guess, like from a kind of an environmental standpoint. So there's several reasons for buying organic seed, I guess. One, possibly because you have to if you're certified organic. You're allowed to get the numbers are there's not an exact number of what you have to buy, like a certain percentage of your seed, but they certainly encourage you to buy organic seed, and you have to prove that it wasn't available. Like if you want to use a variety that is not certified organic, which we do, you just have to show that you've looked for it in a variety of at least three sources and you couldn't find it commercially available. um, but the other one is that a lot of seed is just from an environmental standpoint, you can spray a lot of chemicals on seed crops that you're not necessarily allowed to spray on food crops. So, a lot of seeds might be just sprayed a lot more with chemicals. Not that it would be on the seed necessarily that you're buying, but just kind of looking at the um, environment in general, I suppose. I think it's good to encourage and support organic seed growers that are doing that seed, growing and production in a more sustainable, environmentally friendly manner. So I think it's good, there's the feel good reason or whatever. But I think that, if you think about how plants are bred and um, the you're growing a seed crop um, of whatever tomatoes, and if the if you save your own seed, seeds over time the plant over time could become better adapted to like your growing conditions, your site, through selective breeding. So if it's being grown in an organic system, that plant essentially is used to the conditions in that organic system. And I find often because organic growers aren't doing as much spraying and as much like fertilizing, I suppose, not that we aren't, but you're doing it in a different way, and some of the nutrients aren't as like available, like say for nitrogen, you're not putting down tons of nitrogen at one time. And so like the plant can become adapted to growing in that organic system and passes on those traits then to the seed. It's just does that make sense?
Yes, it does. No, it's something I was always a little confused about, especially when you see two of the same variety, one of which is labeled organic and the other one isn't. And I just wonder, like, yeah, if I planted both of these seeds at our farm, like, would there really be much of a difference in how they produced, or is it more just like supporting organic? But it seems like both. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it can be both. Um, absolutely. I mean, interesting to try them side by side. There's certainly a lot of non I don't know if I'd say a lot. I'd say about we're around 85 to 90% of the seed that we purchase is certified organic. There's some things like sun gold tomatoes, some of the varieties of broccoli that we grow. Um, there's a disease resistant, downy mildew resistant cucumber that we grew this year that was just phenomenal. Was not certified organic, and I think that you need to make the best decision for your business and your farm. And people love sun gold tomatoes, so I'm not going to stop growing those because I can't find certified organic seed. So you know, you do what you can, I think. Any other questions about like that kind of stuff, or anything that we've talked about so far, and kind of get into like scheduling and how we do that. Essentially, like you kind of decided on what crops you're going to be growing for your outlets. Now you need to figure out how when you're going to plant them and how many of each you're going to plant. But that's what we're going to move into next. But any other questions so far on what we've talked about? All right. Again, chime in. It's more fun to have a conversation for me too. So the two things you're kind of answering here are when can it be available and when do you want it available. So you may want to have tomatoes all year long, but it's not really practical. So thinking about, and it's going to depend on your market. If you have a farmer's market that doesn't start until July, then, and that's all you're doing, then you don't need to be planting things in March. So, looking at the possibilities of when you can have crops, and then, um, when exactly you want to have it. And so, crops kind of divided into early season stuff, main season and late season crops. Um, and we have like frost tolerant crops, frost and frost sensitive crops, essentially. This was a chart from, I don't know if it was New Jersey Department of Agriculture. I can't see something blocking the top of mine there, but kind of general availability in New Jersey. It's, I would say accurate for a lot of things. Maybe I would argue that lettuce can be available all summer long if you choose the right varieties. And, you know, this is, if you have high tunnels or any kind of tunnels, really, you can certainly push the boundaries on, either end of the season. But just from in general, um, we are. I just looked at this and was surprised. Maybe it's been a couple of years since I looked at the USDA
Wait, I
plant
have a
hardiness
question,
map.
babe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
When looking at this chart, just because I can't see it too well, does it, like, you know how there's the black lines?
Hmm.
Is that when it's planted from seed or like from a seedling, like a transplant?
Um, so this is the when it's available, just so like
Mhm.
for the harvest. And fortunately, I have my like Zoom. There we go. Okay. Um, this is crop availability. So, if you look at arugula, it can be available from mid-April to mid-June, and then again, beginning of September to December is what they're saying. Bok choy is available generally in the market, I suppose, from mid-April through mid-June. Um, but they're, I guess planting dates and stuff like that are sort of in there in theory, but this is really more from a consumer perspective of like when they could expect to see certain things at a farmer's market.
Do you have something that you use to plan? Because I think I struggle with planning in advance.
Hmm.
And that's something like if there's like this is a seasonality chart for when consumers can buy, but when farmers should be thinking about planting and putting in the ground.
Um, I don't know if I don't necessarily have something in chart form like this. I mean, you could, I mean, we're going to be talking more about some of this and creating your own schedule and how you can kind of figure some of this stuff out. You could kind of using this as like a starting point, I guess, and saying like, oh, okay, so broccoli, it's available in June. So when do I need to seed it and plant it in order for it to be available in June? So it's, you could kind of work backwards from this, but um, yeah, we'll get into a little bit more with scheduling and then see if um, what I have starts to make sense or helps with that. Um, but we have our schedule that we've refined over the years to um, kind of tell us when we're planting, but I don't have it in like chart form necessarily.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I
But
see
we can
too
come back
that
to that too.
Jacob shared in the chat a almanac calendar, which of course to take with a grain of salt because it's just almanac.com, but it does have a like starting point for like when you would potentially sow the seed indoors versus start transplants outside or sow the seeds straight outside. Um, so that's another thing for folks to look back on as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything right at my fingertips, but there's some good in the I have a few like pictures in the slides of it, but the if anybody hasn't seen, it's kind of the classic book, Elliot Coleman's New Organic Grower. There's a lot of good information in there on planting dates. Um, there's a couple other books that we've used as resources that I'm trying to think of the name of it. The Vern Grubinger book, and then JM Fortier. Both of them have pretty extensive kind of guides to planting. Um, and then there's also the Rutgers vegetable uh, recommendations. And it kind of goes by crop. I mean, there's a ton of information in there for each crop, but they have some pretty specific to New Jersey information. Again, it's not like in a chart form, but it's hundreds of pages on for each crop. Tomatoes, kind of when you plant them, varieties recommended for New Jersey. Unfortunately, a lot of it is concentrating on what you should spray those tomatoes at certain times. But there's a lot of good information in there on um, planting dates and variety selection and just general care of those crops. Any other questions or um, ideas as far as that goes? So yeah, I looked at the last thought I looked, I thought we were still in zone 6A. When I feel like when I first started growing, we were still in zone 5B, at least up in like the far north of Sussex County, where like, you know, our farm is kind of right around here. And I guess it had gone to 6A at some point, and apparently now we're in 6B. Um, unless I'm looking at it wrong. But
If I'm not mistaken, I think they just changed, like at the end of last year, or maybe it was the beginning of this season or something.
yeah,
I think it was in the summer they were announced they changed.
Everything shifted, right? Like I used to be 6B and I think I'm 7A now, where I'm at.
yeah, I mean, it was pretty crazy. We certainly haven't seen any temperatures. I mean, you know, 6B is -5 to 0. I mean, I don't remember seeing temperatures colder than that in the last 10 years or so. So, you know, um, that's the trend, I suppose. Um, I mean, I think, you know, I don't think so much about the hardiness zones because it's like the extreme minimum temperature. And as far as like vegetables and stuff go, you know, unless you're doing a lot of winter growing, you're not really concerned, like, you know, whether, you know, my tomatoes that are growing from May through October, don't care if it got down to -5 or -10 sometime in February. But certainly if you're doing a lot of winter growing in tunnels and stuff like that, you know, it's going to have certainly a significant impact on your crops there. We don't grow through the winter. We do have a couple of tunnels. We generally start planting them in March, maybe February, late February to, you know, our market starts mid-May. And our CSA, we don't start until June. So I don't necessarily have an outlet for a lot of our stuff until mid-May or beginning of May. We start to do a farm stand and some seedling sales. But so I'm not thinking so much of that about that personally. What we're more focused on with our planting schedule is going to be the last spring frost and the first fall frost. And certainly, you know, those are impacted by the you know, general warming. We pretty much look at the last frost being around May 15th, and that's what we are planning for, and the first fall frost being around October 15th. Um, Obviously that varies a lot. We've had we've planted earlier. I think we put our tomatoes in maybe May 9th this year, and we're always, you know, trying to push it and are wanting to have the first crops, our first tomatoes at the market, or, you know, with whatever other crops as well. But, you know, you have to be prepared to cover them and kind of have to be prepared with some backup plants. We've started doing a lot of seedling sales in the last couple of years. And so, you know, in a in a disaster, we could take our tomatoes that we were growing for seedlings and we could plant them in the ground. But we've had, you know, frost advisories at the end of May. Remember having our tomatoes in the ground and staked, and it was Memorial Day weekend, and there was, you know, a frost advisory, and we had to put, you know, row cover down over the stakes. And I don't know if it actually frosted or not, but it got down to 34 or 35 degrees, and that wasn't all that long ago. So those are just generally the dates that we're working with. But of course, if you're using row cover, if you're using tunnels, you know, you can stretch those on either end of the season. So getting into scheduling, you know, there's a few different, 3 different categories of crops that we are looking at. First being storage crops. That's like a single planting, single harvest. Things like garlic, storage onions, potatoes, winter squash. You don't necessarily have to harvest them all at once. You know, garlic, we do pull green garlic and then go back later and pull it all. But like, it's not something that we're not doing multiple plantings of garlic. We're not doing multiple plantings of potatoes. It's something that's planted once and then, you know, you harvest it when it's ready. I put possibly fall planted turnips, cabbage, kohlrabi, carrots, beets, and other roots. Those are things that we do successions of usually, and we do them particularly in the spring when things are growing really quickly and you know, you're not going to want to leave crops in the ground for a long time. But in the fall, it's cooler out, obviously, you have less light and things are not growing as fast. So fall cabbage could sit there for quite a while, unless, you know, the temperatures start getting to damaging levels. Same with carrots and beets and stuff like that. You know, carrots are going to get, say, spring planted carrots or, you know, in the summer are going to get oversized and kind of woody after a while. But in the fall, you know, they can sit in the ground. If you mulch them, they could sit there all winter. So, you know, some things might change based on the time of year. But in general, you know, single planting, single harvest for storage crops. Those are kind of the easiest to schedule. And we have extended harvest crops, plant once or, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times and kind of each have a long harvest window. So yeah, zucchini, tomatoes, you guys see the list there. You know, we do 1 planting of peppers, we do maybe 2 plantings of eggplant, 3 plantings of tomatoes. But in general, when you plant them, you're gonna have a pretty long harvest window. Just, you know, you might want a couple plantings in there to kind of refresh them when the first one runs out. You know, I'd say particularly with maybe not as much with tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, but definitely with zucchini and cucumbers. I'm not spraying ours, so when they inevitably get damaged by powdery mildew or, you know, or downy mildew or vine borers or whatever, I have another planting coming on. And so that's how we kind of keep the amount that we're harvesting consistent throughout the season. And then you have your succession crops. And these are things that really need to be planted pretty often. You know, radishes, turnips, they're things that don't necessarily keep for a long time. You know, broccoli, you got to harvest that a couple of times a week. And once it's harvested, though, it's gone. You know, it's not like it's producing, well, some varieties do, I suppose, but most of the big head varieties are not producing multiple crops on one plant. So you gotta, we do weekly plantings of a lot of those. I think I have, yeah. So this is what we're doing, weekly arugula, beans, beets, head lettuce, radish, sunflowers, we do every week. Weekly in the spring and fall, you know, just bok choy, broccoli, we're not doing them all summer long. And then every 2 to 3 weeks, basil, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, scallions. This isn't a total list here, but just some examples of our successions. 3 to 4 weeks, we're doing chard, kale, cucumbers, and zucchini. So those we have like 5 plantings throughout the year. I think we've added the more we've grown, the more we've been adding plantings to just have a consistent supply, and you know, really trying to figure out what the amount of what's the optimal time in between plantings. I mean, with some things, say carrots, you could plant them every week, but they'll hold in the ground, you know, even in the summer, better than say something like a radish. So sometimes it just comes down to like, if you have a 100-foot bed that you're going to plant, would you rather, you know, say in a 3-week period of time, you're going to go through 100 bed feet of carrots? Would you rather, you know, seed it all at once and keep it watered all at once? Or would you rather do 30 feet at a time, 33 feet at a time? And, you know, it's a little more work to, you know, get out the seeder and the seeds to do a small planting. So if you can get by doing them every, you know, 2 or 3 weeks and do a larger planting, that can certainly be more efficient as far as your use of time. So other things we're thinking about for creating a schedule, the days to maturity of the plants. I think the seed catalog is the best source of information for that, because it does vary quite a bit from variety to variety. But the most important thing to note on there is, a lot of them list something, and it can vary from catalog to catalog. They're going to say, you look at broccoli and Johnny's, and it's going to say, one thing, and broccoli and high mowing, and it's going to say, another thing even for the same variety. And it might be because one is saying, how long it takes from seed to harvest, and the other is giving you the time from transplant to harvest. So it's just important to make a note of that. But then as far as creating your own schedule, for transplants, you're going to need to know the amount of time in the greenhouse. And this chart here is kind of gives an idea, broccoli, say, transplant age 4 to 6 weeks. That's how long, you can back up from like the time that you want to put it in the ground to when you want to seed it in the greenhouse. And so having a chart like that to look at to figure out when to seed things in the greenhouse, if that's what you're doing, that's pretty helpful. Need to know what the frost tolerance is. Going back to the first frost dates, you're not going to plan to have tomatoes in putting them out there in April probably. So just in figuring out the times of your greenhouse seeding and your seeding or planting in the ground, just needing to know how sensitive different crops are to frost is important. Plant spacing, just for determining the number of plants you're going to need. Yield, and the amounts that you need to grow in bunches or pounds, or however it most makes sense to you. We
Dave,
do.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Dave, really quick. I just see that we have a hand raised, so I want to take a moment to
Yeah,
pause
absolutely.
and see. Christina, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Tess. Hi, Dave. This is Christina
Hi.
with Farms. How are you?
Great.
I just wanted to ask about succession planting. So I wanted to ask how you manage weed pressure for successions. For example, like if you're direct seeding only into the first half of the bed, do you guys like tarp the second half of the bed and then peel the tarp back when it's time to plant there? Or if you're using like a landscaping fabric, I found if I'm planting into the first half of that bed, then by the time I go to plant into the second half, there's weeds coming up through all the holes. And really anyone on this call, like it's just hard to manage the weeds as an organic grower. So I'm wondering what you guys do for when you come back for those later plantings, and do you weed first before you plant?
Sure. A couple things. Sometimes, like, so if I do have one bed that I'm using for, say, 4 successions of one crop, and I say plant a quarter of that bed, and it's going to be weeks before I do the other ones. Usually, yeah, I mean, tarping it would be one great option, or some kind of mulch. Often I'm probably gonna keep it in cover crop, until I need that, or until say 3 weeks before. So I'm gonna till then, just 3 weeks prior to when I'm gonna want to plant in that area. But the other thing I try to do is say, it's sometimes hard to come back, and whether you're using a tarp or you're, using a tractor with a tiller or whatever, sometimes getting into that like other section of the bed is annoying, especially if you have other crops around it. So I try to use up a full bed at one time. And it might not be with all the same crop. So uh, I have some stuff on grouping crops later. I don't know if we'll get to that. Kind of goes in with like crop rotations and that kind of thing. But we've grouped, say, I don't know, we refer to it by DSQC, direct seeded quick crops. And we group together like salad greens, arugula, and radish and turnip. They're all kind of they are all in the same family for the most part. So that works well with the crop rotation anyway, but I will seed all of them, say if I have a 100-foot bed, I might try to seed 25 feet of each of those crops. So I have like that one bed planted at the same time. So like grouping crops together based on like planting style or family or harvest time or something like that. Like I try to put our direct seeded crops together, and then I've kind of grouped some things like lettuce and scallions together, and sometimes beets, because they're all on the same planting. We do 4 rows per bed on all of those, and they're all transplanted, and they're all going in weekly or maybe every other week, and so I can kind of more quickly use up one bed or one section. And it sort of makes it a little bit more efficient for bed prep, and I'm not winding up with like a small section at the end of a bed. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. I didn't think to group things that way, but yeah, I find myself like dealing with a lot of weed pressure at the second half of the row, so this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if are you tilling or are you no-till or?
So all of my beds are formed in the beginning of the season by a tractor on site because we're not allowed to use the tractor equipment ourselves in the incubation program. So I have to kind of tarp the beds and peel them back as I go to keep the weeds down. So
Okay.
I can't till as I go in this case, but to your point of like planting into the whole bed at once, that's probably the approach I'll take.
Yeah, I mean, it takes sometimes a little more thinking through, or less adherence to a grouping crops by family or something. Sometimes I try to do that, but then I try to be I've gotten a little more flexible with it lately to really try to group things together that are having like the same going in at one time, or like I need to irrigate at one time, or that kind of a thing.
Right. Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Anybody else? All right. So, I mean, speaking of weed pressure, one thing that we are doing more and more of is, or kind of maybe I've always done, is more transplanting versus direct seeding. Just because, transplants, the biggest advantages of them are getting a jump on the weeds and getting a jump on the season, if, in the beginning. Um, you know, direct seeding, you don't need that as much greenhouse space. It's can be beneficial for, you might not need as much labor for planting them, or as much potting soil in the greenhouse. But the weed pressure when you're direct seeding things is certainly greater. We actually transplant a lot of things that I think are, at least historically, direct seeded. We're transplanting beets, we transplant peas, and think of what else. We're basically anything that can be transplanted, we're transplanting. We don't do carrots, we don't transplant beans, we don't transplant radishes or turnips. Basically the things I'm seeding each week are yeah, arugula, radish, turnip, maybe carrots, and beans. But pretty much everything else I've always done the transplant. We have enough greenhouse space to do it. And we have historically had a relatively weedy farm, and if I direct seed beets, with even with the best efforts to flame the bed or tarp it, I'm winding up with weeds in there, even if they're a little bit behind the beets. But if I transplant the beets, I don't have I don't even have to go through and hoe them most of the time, maybe once. They just have enough of a jump on the weeds that they're shading them out within a fairly short amount of time. So starting to plug things into your schedule. Again, this is how we do it. There's a lot of different ways. There's probably some great software out there. I don't know if anybody's using it. If you are, I'd happy to hear what I'd be interested to hear what people are happy with. Our record keeping systems I've typically used Excel. We do some QuickBooks for our financial record keeping, and then some stuff just on paper. But as far as like developing our planting schedules and our seed orders and stuff like that, I've used Excel. Sure, Google Sheets or whatever is um, more or less the same thing, but a spreadsheet. So, we start essentially just on a large spreadsheet, starting plugging in the crops that we're growing. Not thinking about varieties necessarily yet, but just putting in stuff, broccoli, broccoli, kale, radish, tomato, and then thinking about when we want to have them. And so, this might be the thinking about, like, say with radishes, the first date of our farmers markets, May 15th. I see, the variety of radishes we're doing, if it's 30 days to maturity, I'm going to plant them or seed them on April 15th. Give them a month, ready on May 15th. Then something like kale that's 45 days to maturity from transplant. We want it again on May 15th. The planting date, though, I'm going to put in is April 1st, and then backing that up, I think 5 weeks or so, I'm going to seed it in the greenhouse on February 25th, or that week. So when I'm doing this, I generally just put in the date at the beginning of the week. We have not gotten so specific as to, putting in a specific day. Generally, I put in whatever Sunday or Monday date at the beginning of the week, and we know that week we're seeding or planting, these crops. It might happen usually it happens on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. But it varies a little bit. If it's raining out, maybe we're not planting, or lots of factors. Broccoli, it's 60 days to maturity. So if you wanted to have it on May 15th, you'd have to plant it on March 15th. That's probably not going to happen. So probably not going to have broccoli on May 15th. So the other date, I suppose, that to mention for us, outdoor planting starts the first week in April. Potentially, I suppose as our zones are getting warmer and maybe we start to shift that a little bit. But over the last 10, 15 years, I've found it to be pretty consistent that when we can get into the ground, again, we're in far northern Sussex County, so some of you that are a little bit further south, you may shift this a couple of weeks. For a while, I worked at a farm in Philadelphia for a while, and that was probably 2 or 3 weeks different. So obviously it depends somewhat on where you are, but this is what we work with. And some of it may not even be the temperature, it might just be the time when the soil dries out before you can get in. And we've found that pushing the date earlier, and doing row cover, I mean, we always put row cover on, but covering it with plastic or something like that to really push it before the groundwork warms up. I have found that say we tried planting something on the end of March. We tried putting our kale in on March 15th, because it was the temperatures were warm enough, it wasn't freezing. And then we also planted some kale on April 1st. I've found that the stuff that went in early when the soil is cold gets a little bit stunted and doesn't seem to do as well. And the stuff that was planted a couple weeks later that has more ideal conditions, the soil's a little warmer, catches up to that super early planted stuff. So, it's different if we're talking a high tunnel or some other, whether it's heated or not. But as far as outside dates go, I've really found that the first week in April is what works for us. But then there's things, of course, like tomatoes. You're going to kind of set your planting date just on where the warmest, when it's warm enough to plant. In this case, May 15th. And for that one, I didn't put a greenhouse date in there, but usually we're doing about 6 weeks for tomatoes. So we're going to start those like the end of March or so. It depends. 7 weeks. It depends how big of a transplant you want to get. Radish obviously is direct seeded. So I'm just gonna let's see, back up. Just as we're going through this, I want to show you the kind of what we're working towards, I guess, just to give it a little bit of a bigger picture. This is a schedule that we create. So I'm kind of going through step by step in how to build this essentially, or how we build it. But this is an Excel document that turns into our schedule. And so you can see, beans, first frost date is May 13th, but maybe you can plant them a little earlier. So I just start plugging in these dates. Beans, I have a greenhouse seed date, and the date to the field is when they are either transplanted or seeded in the field. And then I have a note here, whether it's transplanted or direct seeded, the number of bed feet, the rows per bed, and the row feet that we're planting out. When this is how I build the document, just going crop by crop and putting in all of the dates. When I am done with that, I sort it by either greenhouse seeding date to create a greenhouse schedule, or the field date to create a planting schedule. And then obviously it'll just say, all the dates for April 1st or whatever, and it'll say, radishes, plant however many feet, and so on for that week. But the way I build it is to just go crop by crop in alphabetical order, think about how often I'm gonna seed it. Beans we're seeding every week, and we're seeding 50 bed feet at 2 rows per bed. It winds up being 100 row feet, and both of those numbers are valuable in different ways, and we can get into that a little bit more. For crops that are going to be seeded in the greenhouse, again, I'm going to look at the field date first. So beets, I know that it's, the first week in April, I can start transplanting beets, and I'm going to back that out about 5 weeks to find my greenhouse seeding dates. And they all just correspond with the date that it goes into the field. We list our varieties and everything there. And so this goes through the whole list of crops, but we'll back up and back to the PowerPoint and just sort of a little bit more about how we're building that document. So in thinking about, your production goals, how much of each crop do you need each week? When that might be, how much can you sell at the market? How much is going to go to each share? Or, you've talked to a chef at the restaurant or a wholesale buyer about what they want each week. So we go through all of our crops and think about how much I want of each one of those. But then you need to kind of reconcile that with your field map and your crop rotation, because you might not have enough room to put everything in there that you want. So that's how we approach it. I look at what we think we can sell through our outlets, and I put those numbers in there. Because I find that through, creative crop rotation, double cropping, things like that, I can generally fit everything in. And it kind of works out. The other way you could think of it, you could create your farm map, put in all the crops, and then, or divide your farm map into, say, like those major and minor crops, and you could go with how much space you have for each one of those. That would be another way to approach it. But at this point for us, I know pretty well how much we're selling of things, and if I need to tweak that a little bit here and there, I tweak it, and I do it by week, because I know that's what we're harvesting each week. So I'm not like necessarily thinking that we're going to grow 2,000 pounds of cucumbers in a year. I'm thinking like how many pounds of cucumbers do I want each week for the harvest? So that's how I kind of organize that. So just a couple examples. You have a 50-member CSA, you want broccoli, you want to give a pound of week per share. So you need 50 pounds per week. It's available in June. The, key piece of data, I guess, there is figuring out, so for something like this, like how much do you need to plant in order to get a pound of broccoli? There's a lot of charts out there. Johnny's actually has some really good, in their growers library, they have some good charts on, and it's, well, this one here I believe is from Johnny's, but you can see broccoli gives you some dates too, but the average yield per 100-foot row, and ideally you can find your the information in average yield per 100-foot row. A lot of data out there is in per acre. You can find the calculations to convert that, and it just depends on how many rows you have per acre and all of that. But you can find enough charts that give you the average yield per 100-foot row. So we go back and plug that in. So the yield 50 pounds per 100-foot row, you got to plant 100 row feet per week. And so, you can kind of make a chart of that. If you know when it's available, then you can put in the dates as well. The other thing you need to know, I guess, is spacing. This is another chart. We can get this information from the seed catalogs as well. This is from Elliot Coleman again, but giving row spacing and plant spacing. But going forward with broccoli, you're going to want to have it available in June. You need 100 feet, row feet per week, plants per foot. Happens to be 1 plant per foot, so easy math. You need 100 plants per week, and plug in your dates, beginning of April, back it up to when you're going to seed each one, and plug in your weekly planting dates, and then in order to convert to, if you have 2 rows per bed, then it would be 50 bed feet. And that the bed feet comes in handy with making your maps, because I mean, if you're like me, I make the maps by, I kind of draw out all the beds or sections per bed. It's easier to think of that way. But as far as you need the row feet to think about the number of plants you need, and then therefore figure out the number of seeds you need to order for that number of plants. Does that make sense? Anybody? Questions? More examples. Again, kind of using the same thing, same chart as far as from Johnny's there. You say you have a 20-member CSA, or you think you can sell 20 pounds of beets or 20 bunches of beets, however you want to think of it, per week. If you look at the chart, it'll say for beets, beets is 65 pounds is the average yield per 100-foot row. And then go back. So kind of set up a equation there, 65 pounds per 100 row feet. But what you need is 20 pounds. So you don't know what it is. 20 pounds per what is X. Solve for that, kind of cross those. 65x equals 2,000 X's. You need 30 row feet per week in order to get the 20 pounds. And again, you figure, depending on what your rows per bed are and everything, you can get your bed feet from that. So those are things for, the succession plantings are a little bit easier to figure out with that. It's things like broccoli and beets, because you're pulling them out. The extended harvest crops are a little bit different, because you kind of need to factor in like the life of the crop. They do, you can get the yield, but like Johnny's will say 200 pounds of zucchini, which I think is a little bit low, but it's per 100 feet. But they don't necessarily say like over what period of time. It's not per week. I generally would say 6-8 weeks, the lifetime of like a planting of zucchini. So you average out you know, the lifetime of the crop, 8 weeks, 200 pounds divided by 8 weeks, gonna, you know, give you roughly 25 pounds per week per 100-foot bed. So you use that 25 pounds per 100 feet. Say again, you want to give out a pound a week of zucchini to your CSA. Again, you solve for X. You need to find out what number will give you the 20 pounds. 100 feet gives you 25 pounds. What gives you 20 pounds? You solve for X, it's 80 pounds. So that's, you know, doing that for each crop essentially. And then we put it all together in our schedule here. We add in, you know, adding in the varieties that we might be planting each week so that we know when we're in the greenhouse. And then we're also needing to add in, you know, for the greenhouse, I'm not thinking about how many seeds or like cells I'm gonna seed. I want to know how many like flats I'm gonna fill out. So it might be easier to see in here, but say, you know, bok choy seeded April 1st, I got 30 bed feet, 104 rows per bed, 120 row feet. I add in, you know, the number of plants per foot, so that you can then know the total number of plants divided by the cell size, and we're seeding, you know, 1.88 trays of bok choy. We would probably just seed 2 trays. But, you know, each week, so we sow that in the greenhouse. February 26th, March 4th, transplanting out, April 1st, April 8th. Any questions on that?
I have a quick question. So, like, when you are planning out your successions, have you kind of just done enough trial and error between varieties to know which ones, like, if you're doing 4 different varieties of beets, do you know which one is your first beet, which one's your second beet, a third and fourth, or are you kind of like you've weeded out the varieties that you know you want to grow, so you only grow a couple, so you don't have all of that confusion? I don't think I'm asking this question in a very concise
I
way.
think I know. Well, let me try to answer and then let me know if I'm right or not.
Okay, sure.
I mean, you could essentially, well, you could do successions in a way by putting, say, different beets in that have different days to maturity and planting them all at the same time. You know, but so in the instance of beets, we are only growing one variety of beets. I guess I don't factor it in a real significant way. I'm trying to think of like what one of a
Maybe
crop.
like, I'm sorry, maybe like lettuce would be a better example because there's so much
Right. A lot of different.
vast difference in varieties as far as
Right.
like when they bolt and what kind of tolerances they have. So like for a lettuce example, you would be factoring variety into that succession, I would imagine,
Yeah,
right?
so I'm going on to lettuce. So yes, it is kind of already factored in. And yes, based on experience. I don't necessarily think a ton about like the different days to maturity of the different varieties, but like here, lettuce, you know, I have the variety that we're planting. The first ones is going to be Burgum's green. So we have like cool season lettuce, warm season, I don't know, and then sort of summer season. So we're going to start off with this Burgum's green, Nancy, and Alkindus, I believe. I don't know if that's totally up to date, but those were ones that were doing some a big leafy one and then 2 different butterheads and sort of have the row feet within, you know, I know we're doing 75 bed feet, but we kind of divide it up with 40 feet of Burgum's green, 10 feet of Nancy, and 25 feet of Alkindus. And that's sort of just a note we have in there within that row. But yeah, they might all have slightly different days to maturity, but you know, we're planting them every week, and I figure, you know, there's some variation, but it's okay. We're gonna have some lettuce to harvest each week. If you knew that something was like way different, you know, you may want to have that be on a different planting schedule, where you're, you know, starting it a little bit earlier or later or whatever, you know, the case may be. Trying to think like, say with like fall turnips or something. I know that like the hacker eye salad turnip, it's pretty quick maturing, but like purple top turnip takes a lot longer to grow. So, you know, I'm gonna start if I want them both ready on, you know, October 1st, I'm gonna start the hacker eye on, August 15th, and the purple top on August 1st or something like that. You know, I might factor some of that in there, but you know, we do a lot of varieties. I think, like I said before, we are getting a little bit less, or like, you know, zucchini. I don't necessarily like, there's slight differentiations in the maturity dates of our zucchini or maybe our cucumbers, but like I kind of just am not paying a whole lot of attention to them. Does that answer or sort of answer your question?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think like a lot of this, it sounds like comes with experience too. So like if for me, if I'm just starting out and I don't know what varieties do well in my soil yet, I'm just kind of making educated decisions on what might work well for my situation, and then taking the information from that season to inform the next season.
Yeah, I mean, I leave, you know, I keep a farm journal like on just a notebook, and kind of write down what we did each day, and that's a lot of our organic record keeping is there. But I always keep something in the back just where I might do it on my phone too, taking notes on just, you know, when you're walking around the field, like, or it could be at the end of the day or while you're walking around on your phone, just saying like, this is ready too early, or this is like, you know, this variety bolted, so don't plant that, you know, in July, or that kind of thing. Like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of trial and error, and you know, some of it's, you know, based on your, you know, farm specific soil, or just like how good you are at irrigating or paying attention to things, or you know, there's a million factors. So like just taking like really extensive notes, and like observing what's doing well and what's not doing well, is extremely important. And you know, particularly with this type of farming where like in the small scale, where like you can't afford to like lose a whole bed of something, because like that might be a significant amount of your income. You know, if you're farming 20 acres, like you lose, you know, one variety of something, maybe not as big of a deal. But yeah.
Cool. No avoiding trial and error, y'all. That's the whole thing.
Dave, real quick, I have another question about succession planting. An idea that's been sort of like bouncing around in my head recently is say we know that like the harvest demand for carrots, say in the spring, is we know we need to grow 500 feet. As far as like planting successions, do you find that doing, say, 5 successions of 100 feet versus 2 successions of 250, which one sort of affords you more flexibility? Like when you say like doing as big of a succession as you can, assuming you can move it all in time, is to your advantage? Or do you feel like doing like more smaller successions allows you to sort of plug other small things in here and there? I hope that makes sense.
I think so. I mean, I'll address it with carrots, I guess. In the fall, we do one big planting of carrots. But because the carrots, like in the fall, are not, they will keep for a while. You know, they can sit in the ground and they can kind of all mature. And there's not like a rush to get them out. You can then go and harvest them every week and take what you need each week. And I mean, ideally, I would do that in the spring too, because it's a lot easier to say, I'm going to do a whole section of carrots, I'll call it. And like our sections are 4 beds, are 20 feet by 150 feet. It's 4 or 5 foot beds, and they're 150 feet long, because that's just what fits in our field, or, you know, efficient use of space. But, you know, I would rather go in, prep that whole area at once, you know, whatever, put compost down, fertilizer, whatever you're going to do, bring the tractor out, till it all at once, you know, be really efficient with like your bed prep, seed it all at once. And then particularly with carrots, because you got to keep watering them, you know, until they germinate. And that's a pain. Carrots, you know, love them and hate them. It's really rewarding when you get a nice stand of carrots, but they're a pain. But you got to keep the soil wet, until they germinate. So I can go out and I'll set up. We have these like wobblers, kind of small irrigation setup, and I can just keep them out there and keep them watered. And the wobblers don't water one bed at a time, so I can just like water the whole section at once, and I don't have to move it around a lot. It's just like efficient for getting that planting up and going. But in the spring, or with something like radishes, say that like in the spring with the carrots, like if I do if I did 100 feet at once instead of 500 feet, um it's a lot of, well, one, it's the irrigating and all of that, and the bed prep, it's a lot more work, going back and forth, doing one bed at a time, coming back to do the next bed, whatever. But I do it because if I did 500 feet of carrots all at once, say in like April, by the time I got to that last 100 feet, it's gonna be they're not gonna be any good anymore. They're gonna be split, or they're gonna be woody, or they're gonna rot, or something. Like they don't have the same holding quality in the field. Or say like radishes, over the course of the spring, we might seed 1,000 feet of radishes, and that would be the easiest thing to just seed them all at once, or even two plantings. But like, by the time you got to that last or even a couple 100 feet into harvesting that section, the radishes might be split and pithy and just not good. So it kind of just, it depends on, the fall is a lot easier, but it kind of just depends on think how many you think you'll go through in a week, and how long those crops will hold in the field for each one. And you kind of have to just go by that, over what's convenient.
Totally. Thank you, Dave.
Sure. Any other questions on successions or anything else we've talked about so far? I got a few more slides, but
I see
happy to answer
another
questions.
another question in the chat. How much extra seeding do you plan for in the greenhouse? Example, if you know you need 6 trays of beets, do you seed more in case of germination or transplanting failure?
We do. So let's see. Just looking at the schedule here, lettuce, 75 feet, or say 300 row feet. Lettuce is 1 plant per foot, so technically you only need 300 plants. But I've got a calculation in here. I multiply it by 1.2. So we are always planting 20% extra. So we need 300 plants, but we wind up with 360. We probably even wind up with a little bit more than that, because we're putting it in 128 cell flat, and it says 2.8, and you're not going to seed 2.8 flats generally, because just kind of a waste of space. So we're probably seeding 3 flats of lettuce. And the reason I say probably is because Danielle is mostly in charge of the greenhouse. So I am sometimes a little out of touch with exactly what's going on there. But yeah, does that answer your question? 20% extra for anything like that. Yeah, does that make sense?
It looks like it. Yeah, thank
Okay,
you. And
cool.
I'm wondering, I'm curious too, just out of that conversation, if you guys always planned for a seedling sale, or if this like 20% extra buffer just kind of gave you is giving you a byproduct of additional things to sell.
That's how it started.
Yeah. Okay,
Uh,
cool.
but now we're not just relying on that 20% extra. But
Okay.
started by somebody saying, oh, do you have any, I don't know, whatever he wanted, tomatoes probably. And we're like, oh, well, yeah, we did seed some extra tomatoes, and we don't need them because our tomatoes in the field are growing fine. Sure, I'll bring some, we'll bring a couple extra flats to the market or whatever. And then it just kind of took off from there. And now it's like, now it's the opposite. We might use, some of our extras from the seedling sale to like plant out in the field if we have like a crop loss. But we're doing a lot of seedlings. It's been a really nice like early season income for us. And it's pleasant work to do in March and April in the greenhouse. But yeah, that's how it started though, is having a few extra of everything, hopefully extra.
Nice. And then a follow-up question to that we just got in the chat. Now that you are planning for it, do you take pre-orders, or like how do you plan for your seedling sale?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of evolved slowly. So we had you know, a rough idea, I guess, of how many we thought we could sell, but you know, as with everything, it kind of evolves over time. We have done pre-orders a little bit, but that's not necessarily how we figure our numbers. Um, we stopped doing pre-orders actually because packing in general, packing orders, whether it be vegetables or seedlings, is just really time consuming, and we don't always have the labor to do it. So we set up you know, at the farm, we set up a seedling sale for all of May. People can come out and just pick out what they want, and then we, you know, bring them all to the farmers market, which is also a lot of labor. But you know, it's a nice way to sell things in May. Um, and yeah, it's trial and error, you know. We grew, you know, 10 trays of cucumbers last year, but we sold out. You know, we need to grow more. You know, it probably started out with also like, how much space do we have in the greenhouse? You know, we have a separate seedling schedule, and kind of doing the same thing, like instead of, you know, how much space we have in the field, and kind of dividing that up, like how much space do we have in the greenhouse, or really how much do we want to grow of each crop? How many flats does that add up to? Can we fit it? No, okay, we have to like go back and, you know, decrease some of the numbers of flats. But yeah, at this point it's trial and error. I don't know how exactly we, you know, started out figuring out exactly how many trays of cucumbers we should grow, but it was probably something like that.
That's so interesting. It sounds like such a balance of like, you know, making sure you have everything you need to grow out in the field, but not having to separate things too much, where you're like divided, where one half of the greenhouse is for your seedling sale, and the other half is for growing in the field. I imagine it is a lot. Kudos to Danielle for managing
Yeah.
your greenhouse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all pretty well organized in there. We usually try to keep them separate just because there's different pot sizes and they dry out at different rates. So we kind of have like
Mm,
one side for one and one side for the other. Um,
wow.
yeah, I don't know if you'll have any other questions. I mean, you know, things I was, like I said, this was a talk kind of developed for a different for a class, and there was a lot more time in that class, so I had you know, a bunch more in there. But on like, you know, more just like on field mapping and stuff, and kind of um, figuring out, you know, the amount of space that you have, and your rows per bed, and you know, crop sections and stuff like that. I know that there had been a question about like, you know, production areas, and or I guess like double cropping, and if there was crops that we did that really lent themselves to, you know, following with another crop. And I just thought I'd show this is like one of our field maps. And I don't know if I mentioned, we're doing like cover crop in every other bed. So F is just fallow. So there's a full year cover crop in each one. But then you can see in every other section here, you know, I have this is kind of how I divide things up. I'll have like, we have I'll go through that document again, the schedule document, and sort it based on, you know, the crops, and I might even group them together by plant family. I have another column in there so I can sort it by plant family, and I can pair things up. Um, but essentially, so say here, like in this thing here, zucchini cucumber 1. That's our first plantings of zucchini and cucumber. It takes up one section. Again, this is like 4 beds by 150 feet. Through trial and error partially, and through looking at planting dates and you know, days to maturity and stuff, I figured that I can fit something in after that first planting of zucchini and cucumber. So I have fall brassica going in after that. Um, Tomatoes, I just know tomatoes a full year thing. I'm not trying to do anything before or after tomatoes. You know, lettuce is a pretty is a pretty quick crop. So this happens to be like the second sort of section of lettuce, but it's followed by sunflower 3. So a lot of these first crops that we did for double cropping. I don't double crop everything, but lettuces sometimes, yeah, like an early planting is zucchini, cucumber, beets, those DSQC, that was direct seeded quick crops, radishes and turnips and stuff like that. Garlic and peas, I know that they come out by July. I can actually fit one of our late plantings of zucchini and cucumbers in there. I kind of divide things up like that. We have a lot of space, but what I'm kind of aiming to do really is to give things a full year in between, a full year break. So I guess I could, spread it out a lot more, and say I could do sunflowers up here and lettuce here, but instead I'm, grouping them together. I already have that section prepped, and it's easy to go through, easy enough to go through that section with a tiller and get it ready for the sunflowers after the lettuce. And then I'm going to give this section just a full year break after that. So that's just kind of our map, one of our field maps there. But I know we're getting close to being out of time. So I don't know if there's anything else that anybody wanted to talk about briefly. Could be in, field mapping. I also had, there's some stuff on, well, we talked about seed calculations really, and putting our seed order together. I have that as a separate document. That was, we go through and put in all the varieties and the numbers of row feet from that schedule document, and, kind of get everything in there. I had some slides on crop rotation and grouping your crops. We kind of talked about that a little bit anyway, putting things together that might have the same crop family or just are harvested at the same time. But in the end, it's, you create your ideal schedule with everything you want to have in there. I want to have 200 feet of cucumbers and 500 feet of zucchini and whatever. You go down the list. And then you add up the row feet or the bed feet that you have for everything, and I try to fit it in. And so I take I take that map, and I start plugging things. I start plugging things in there. This was a slide, I guess, of how I kind of group things. I'll say with carrots, I'll sort them, and I figure out what the first planting of carrots is, and I know that the dates that they're going to be kind of planted. So I'll add this up, see if it comes to whatever 600 feet is. It's not grouped that way right at the moment, but let's just say it is. I know our first 5 or 6 plantings of carrots are going to equal 600 feet. I figure out what the dates are. So that's going into the field on, from April 3rd to May 29th is when I'm seeding those carrots. So I know that section is going to be occupied from April 3rd to whenever the May 29th, planting comes out. But I know then that section's probably done sometime in, maybe the end of July, and could be ready for a fall crop. And I do that with basically all of our sections, figure out, when that section, is going to be occupied, and when I can use it for something else.
Thanks so much, Dave. There was one more question in the chat about, is there a reason why you cover crop every other row rather than in blocks?
So yeah, sorry, the rows are not in here. This is actually a block, each one of these sections. So this is lettuce 2 is 4 beds, and it is a block. So this is a whole cover cropped block of 20 feet by 150 feet. The next one is, a bed is 4 beds of lettuce, 150 feet long. And that we actually did experiment with, in one of our fields, we did it by block. In one of the fields, we did it by every other bed we cover cropped. There were some advantages and disadvantages to each. The every other bed gave a nice amount of airflow and a nice walking path in between each crop, but it was a lot of mowing. So for the blocks, I could cover crop and let that cover crop get fairly tall and it didn't really matter, but if I'm doing every other bed, I kind of needed to keep it mowed in order to be able to like get through there, and so that um, it wasn't shading out the crops. So this year we're opting to do the just every other section is fallow cover crop.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thanks so much, Dave. This has been just such a wealth of information. I'm wondering if, we had some of the questions ahead of time that I think we addressed most of them, but I thought maybe a nice parting note would be, we all experience as growers the like August, September burnout, July, the whole season. It's a lot. And thinking about succession planting and fall planting especially was so challenging for me as a small scale grower that had a no crew. Trying to think about weeding, harvesting, pest maintenance, getting to markets, getting my orders filled, and also getting fall crops planted. Like, do you have any tips for farmers who are just getting the hang of things on how to stay on top of all of that when things are really coming to a head at that peak season?
Yeah, it's extremely challenging to balance it all. Like when you're, because the time to put in your fall crops is like the time when your tomatoes are probably peaking,
Mm.
or about to, or zucchini is, if you go and look at those days to maturity and you look at when you want to have those fall crops, a lot of you know, the radishes and some of the really short-term ones excluded, like broccoli and cauliflower and you know well, cabbage and a lot of those, your carrots, you're planting them or seeding them the end of July or the beginning of August. And yeah, that's a really hard time. I think you have to have it all on a schedule. And I just need to like, yeah, have that schedule there in front of me. Like, this is what needs to be seeded this week, and this is what needs to be planted each week. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess in farming, there's always a little bit of like, you know, decision making, or you have to prioritize. Like, am I going to weed that bed of whatever turnips, or am I going to get the broccoli in? Then you have a little bit of wiggle room, but yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have an easy answer as far as like how to actually make it happen, but I know that you don't want to be thinking about it and trying to plan it at that time. Like, take the winter and do your planning now, like have it all mapped out, have it all in a nice schedule for you to just follow. And you're going to have to make the decisions as far as like what's best to do, or what's the top priority thing when it comes to that time. And it's stressful, it's hard. That's why, yeah, August burnout is definitely a thing, because it's such a busy time. So I don't, obviously there's, say lots of things about staying organized and staying on top of your weeds before they get out of control and blah blah blah. But the reality is it's hard, and yeah, it's a balance.
Yeah. Planning
Yep.
sounds like to
Planning.
help out your future self.
Yep.
Give yourself a schedule.
For sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I just want to invite anybody who has any additional follow-up questions or thoughts to reach out. We'll be reaching out, Dave, if it's okay with you to share the slides with folks who came tonight.
Yeah, and if you look through them, there are more slides, like some of the stuff that we didn't really get to. So if you want to go through, yeah, there's some more on like, beds and row divisions and mapping and crop rotation, stuff like that. So yeah, share that, and people could definitely go through that. And if people can reach out to you for questions, or our farm, Kittatinny Mountain Farm, it's Kittatinny Mountain Farm at Gmail, and email's better than like reaching out on Facebook or Instagram and stuff. But that we have those pages, and you could see pictures of what we're doing and stuff like that on there for sure. But yeah, I'd be happy to answer follow-up questions in whatever way makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I'll share this, the PowerPoint slides. We should have a recording of the session tonight available soon as well. So I'll send everyone a follow-up email. And if you have any additional questions or comments, we always welcome that. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I'll also include some more information about any future events in the follow-up email as well. So thanks again so much, Dave. I really appreciate your time and your sharing your expertise with us. And everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight and participating. And you know, I'm very grateful to offer these educational experiences to everyone for free. So very grateful for you all showing up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tess, and good luck, everybody, and hope you have a restful, but also, you know, somewhat productive winter. But yeah, take some time to also rest up and get yourself ready for the next season. So take a
For sure.
vacation if you can.
Hear, hear. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.